The crystal of the wine glass shattered between my fingers, and the blood trickled out as silently as the words I could never manage to say. His eyes, those eyes that were no longer wolf nor entirely man, locked onto mine for an eternal instant. The entire room held its breath. "You don't belong here," the lady in black whispered beside me, her smile as sharp as a blade. And for the first time in 20 years, it wasn't fear that paralyzed me, but the ancestral fury that ran through my veins, the same fury he had recognized when he found me between the snow and the howls of the mountains. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. When they found me, my body no longer resembled the women I'd seen in old portraits. My skin, weathered by sun and wind, bore marks that came not from age, but from survival. I was a noise among the howls, a forgotten echo of the mountains. They said I was left there as a child during a winter when even the wolves came down from the slopes starving. They said no one ever looked for me. That forgotten was my last name. But I remembered. Him. The man who was not a man when I first saw him. It was 20 years of silence and hunger, of nights when the cold felt like an animal breathing inside me. I learned the language of ice before I learned that of words. I learned that a look can be a knife, that the wind is more loyal than human compassion. And it was among the wolves that I found the first semblance of order. They accepted me when the world had spit me out. The pack's alpha female let me lie with her pups, and there was something sacred in that shared warmth. I was neither woman nor beast. I was simply alive. It was on a foggy morning that the alpha came down from the high valley. He didn't howl like the others. His silence was older, denser. His dark fur bore old scars, and his eyes. Those eyes didn't belong to any animal. There was thought in them, there was guilt. I called him King, even before I knew his human name. He watched me from a distance, always on the fringe, as if waiting for me to recognize him. And maybe, in some buried corner of my memory, I had. When they came for me, uniformed men, armed with harsh voices and the smell of civilization, it was he who appeared among them. The king, but now standing tall in human clothes and with human eyes and the same silence that cut through the wind. They called him Mr. Wolf, leader of an isolated community, heir to lands and traditions that had nothing to do with the forest. I trembled seeing him. Not because he was a powerful man, but because his presence returned to the world the weight I had forgotten how to carry. They led me to a vast house of stone and glass, where the fire burned without need. They said I was a survivor, that I would be studied, re-educated, introduced to society. Those words sounded like disguised chains, the women whispered when I passed. They spoke of my scent, the way I walked, the eyes that never looked down. To them I was wild. To me, they were the ones in cages. But the king, he never judged me with words. His gaze asked questions that even he didn't dare to speak. The first time we were alone, a storm was battering the windows of the main hall. The fire trembled in the hearth and the air felt heavier than stone. He approached in silence, his hands firm on the wooden table, his gaze fixed on my face. "Do you remember?" he asked. His voice was deep, almost hoarse, as if it had been shaped by the same wind that raised me. I wanted to answer, but there was no possible name for what connected us. He watched me as if looking into a broken mirror, one half of him lost among the wolves, the other trying to remain human. "I remember your eyes," I finally replied, my fingers gripping the edge of the dark wooden chair. "I remember you watching me when I slept with the pups, but I don't remember before." He nodded slowly as if confirming something he already knew. "You were just a child when I found you," he said, taking a few steps back. "Abandoned, nearly frozen. No one thought you'd survive. I should have brought you back then. Why didn't you?" The question hung between us like the mist that covered the mountains on winter mornings. I saw his jaw tighten, his fingers clench the back of the chair in front of him. "Because I didn't belong in this place either," he finally answered. "And maybe I was too selfish to let you go." The following days were a slow descent. The women of the house, ladies, maids, shadows, plotted in whispers. They said I had bewitched him, that the king was losing his mind. One of them, his sister, spoke loud enough for me to hear. "That creature doesn't belong with us." I pretended not to listen, but the words burned. Only Martha, one of the oldest maids, brought me water and looks of compassion. "Be careful, child," she whispered one night as she straightened the sheets on the bed they'd given me. "They don't forgive outsiders. Who are they?" I asked, watching the shadows the candle cast on the bedroom walls. Martha hesitated, her eyes darting to the closed door. "His family. The wolves of the hills. They say they're as old as the land itself, that their ancestors made pacts with creatures of the forest." She made a quick sign over her chest, as if warding off an evil omen. "The master's mother died giving birth to the youngest. The father? Well, the father vanished on a stormy night 20 years ago. They only found his clothes by the lake. Since then, she's the one who runs everything, even without the title." "She?" I asked, feeling a chill. "Miss Amelia, the oldest sister, the one who never married. They say she's the one who raised him, who taught him his place. They say he fears her, even if he won't admit it." That night, I dreamed of the lake I had never seen. In its dark waters, a face was reflected, half man, half wolf, and a voice called to me from the depths, a voice that sounded like his, but wasn't. I woke with the taste of fear in my mouth, the sheets soaked with sweat despite the biting cold. I got up and walked to the window, opening it to let the pre-dawn wind purify the air. In the distance, on the hills, a lone howl cut through the night. I closed my eyes, letting that sound bring me back to the only place where I had never felt fear. The next day, during breakfast, I noticed different looks cast my way. The maids avoided my gaze, the few men who served the house lowered their heads when I passed. Only Amelia kept her eyes fixed on me, a cold smile playing on her thin lips. "It seems our guest is adapting well," she said, breaking the silence that dominated the table. "My only concern is that so many years among animals may have erased certain basic notions." I felt my body stiffen, but I held her gaze. The king, seated at the head of the table, didn't look up from his plate. "What notions would those be?" I asked, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. Amelia smiled, pleased to have gotten a reaction. "Decency, place, order." She pronounced each word like a verdict. "I heard you opened your bedroom window last night, despite the cold. And the staff says you stood there, exposed, as if calling for something." The whispers around the table grew louder. I saw Martha standing by the kitchen door, turn pale. "I was calling the wind," I answered simply. "It doesn't judge me for what I am." The silence that followed was broken only by the clink of the king's fork against his plate. He finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't name. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice low but firm. The servants withdrew quickly. Amelia remained seated, her hands clenched on the white tablecloth. "You too, sister," he said without looking directly at her. She hesitated, her face contorted in an expression of displeasure. Finally, she rose, smoothing the pleats of her dark dress. "As you wish, my brother." Her voice was too sweet, almost venomous. "Just remember what's at stake, what has always been at stake." When we were alone, he let out a tired sigh. He looked older in that moment, the lines on his face deeper. "I apologize for my sister," he said, not looking directly at me. "She grew up with strict rules and she fears anything that threatens the order she knows." "And am I a threat?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. He smiled, and there was sadness in that smile. "You're a reminder of what exists beyond these walls, of what I—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his dark hair. "There's a celebration tonight. The winter solstice, an old tradition for the families of the hills. I want you to attend." It wasn't a request, but it didn't sound like an order either. "Why?" "Because I need them to see you, to recognize you as part of this house." "I'm not part of this house," I replied, a lump forming in my throat. "I don't even know if I want to be." He stood, and for a moment I thought he would approach. But he kept his distance, as if afraid of what might happen if he got too close. "I know," he said, almost in a whisper. "But I need you to be there, afterward. Afterward, you can choose your own path." At the grand ball that marked the solstice, an ancient ritual for the hill families, I was forced to attend. They dressed me in white like a trophy torn from the wild. The crystal lights multiplied my reflection into 1,000 pieces. All eyes converged, hungry to see the tamed beast. I could barely breathe. The king entered later, dressed in black, his face a mask. When our gazes met, the hall fell silent. The murmuring ceased as if the air had been sucked out. And then one of the women, his sister, raised her glass and announced what everyone was waiting for. "This is the creature our king brought from the mountains, the orphan of the wolves, the shame that became a fascination." The laughter that followed was like a whip. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. And it was in that instant that he moved. Slow, deliberate. He walked to me, ignoring the stares. He stopped before his sister, took the glass from her hand, and in a low but firm voice said, "The shame is what you make of her. I only brought home what was already mine." The sound of shattering crystal echoed like thunder. No one dared to breathe. I felt the world spin, not from fear but from recognition. This man who had once been a beast was now baring his own heart before everyone. Society would surely judge him. And I knew that from that point on, we would both be exiles from any place called home. That night, as whispers grew through the walls, he found me on the balcony, under a light rain. His gaze was the same as before, the same as in the valley. "You belong to the wind," he murmured, and I answered without thinking. "And you, to the silence." He smiled, and in that gesture was both exhaustion and promise. Our fate had not yet been fulfilled. It was only just beginning. I knew the world would try to tear us apart, the ballrooms, the families, the judgments. But I also knew that the echo of the wolves is never completely silenced. I still hear it in the distance, calling for us. And sometimes when the wind blows from the north, the sound is almost human. I didn't sleep that night. Dawn broke, and with the first light came the certainty of what had to be done. I abandoned the fine clothes they had given me, putting on a simple cotton dress I found among the linens in my room. I tied my hair in a messy bun without looking in the mirror. I knew my face was no longer the same since I'd arrived at that house. There was a shadow in my eyes that hadn't been there before. The weight of the walls, the stairs, the unspoken words. The hallway was empty when I left. The house was asleep, exhausted from the previous night's excesses. I descended the stairs in silence, each step lighter than the last, remembering how I used to walk among the forest trees without breaking twigs, without startling the small animals. It was at the library door that I found Martha, her eyes wide, her breath held. She stared at me for a moment, and something in her gaze told me she knew what I intended to do. "He's at the lake," she whispered, indicating the back door with a discreet nod of her head. "Been there since dawn. Every year on this day he goes there. Alone." I nodded my thanks, but she grabbed my arm as I tried to pass. "Be careful, child." Her voice was just a breath. "The waters keep old secrets, and not all monsters have claws or teeth." I left through the back of the house, crossing the meticulously kept garden where winter flowers defied the cold with their pale colours. The path to the lake was marked by dark, moss-covered stones. The air was heavy, as if a storm was approaching, though the sky was clear. As I moved forward, the silence grew deeper, denser, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I found him with his back to me, motionless at the edge of the lake. The water's surface was a black mirror, reflecting the pale morning sky. I didn't announce myself, knowing he had already sensed my presence. We stood like that for long minutes, both contemplating the dark water, each lost in our own thoughts. "My father disappeared here," he said finally, without turning. "On a night like last night, 20 years ago. They found his clothes folded on this rock. Nothing else." I approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "What happened to him?" He turned then, and his face seemed carved from stone. "They say he drowned. An accident, perhaps, or—" He hesitated, his gaze lost in the water again. "Or a deliberate act." "You don't believe that?" I stated, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "No." The word came out like a sigh. "My father was an expert swimmer, and he knew this lake better than he knew himself." He bent down, touching the water's surface with his fingertips, creating small ripples that expanded to the shore. "The night he disappeared, there was an argument between him and Amelia about the family's future, about traditions and secrets. The wind blew harder, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What secrets? He stood up, facing me directly. The same ones you know without knowing. The same ones that make the wolves accept you as part of the pack. The same ones that are in my blood, and perhaps in yours too. I took a step back, my heart pounding. I don't understand. My family's story is old, he said, taking a step toward me. As old as these hills. They say my ancestors made a pact with the creatures of the forest, that they learned to shift, to live between two worlds, that the price of this gift was the soul of the firstborn in each generation. That's just a legend, I murmured, though something inside me knew it wasn't. Legends have seeds of truth, he replied, now so close I could feel his warmth. My father refused to uphold the tradition. He refused to give his eldest son to the call of the forest. To me, silence, only the wind in the trees and the gentle lapping of the water. And then he disappeared, I concluded, my voice low. And then he disappeared. He nodded slowly. That same night there was a thunderstorm. Thunder like I'd never heard. Lightning that seemed to tear the sky itself apart. And in the midst of that fury I ran. I ran into the forest, feeling something inside me burn, transform, break. He raised his hand, touching my face with his fingertips, a touch as light as a bird's wing beat. I stayed with the wolves for days, unable to return, unable to be fully human again. That's when I found you, an abandoned child, nearly frozen. Your eyes were like mine, torn between two worlds. I recoiled, feeling the world spin around me. Are you saying I'm like you? I'm saying you might be. That maybe the wind brought you to me for a reason. That maybe... His words were cut short by a sharp, piercing scream. We turned simultaneously toward the sound. Amelia stood on the stone path, her face a mask of fury and horror. What have you done? She shrieked, advancing toward us. What did you tell her? You know what happens when the secret is revealed. The sky suddenly darkened, as if a massive cloud had covered the sun. The wind picked up, churning the lake's water, shaking the trees violently. He placed himself between me and his sister, his eyes fixed on hers. Enough, Amelia. It's over. I won't continue this madness. She laughed, a sharp, sick sound. You think you have a choice? You think you can just stop being what you are? It's your blood. It's your heritage. It's the price we pay for our position. What price? I asked, stepping forward, ignoring the warning look he shot me. Amelia turned her attention to me, her dark eyes gleaming with an ancient hatred. The price of the transformation, she answered, her voice trembling. The blood of the child on the first solstice after their 20th year. The sacrifice to maintain the family's gift. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. You're insane, I murmured. Insane? She laughed again, and now there were tears in her eyes. That's what I thought when my father sacrificed my younger sister. That's what I thought when he tried to explain it was necessary. That it was tradition. That it was the price to be paid. Amelia... He tried to interrupt her, but she raised a hand, silencing him. Our father broke the cycle, she continued, looking at her brother now. He refused to give you up, said he would find another way. And I believed him. I believed we could be different. Her voice broke, but then he disappeared. And you ran away, and the curse continued. The sky grew even darker, and now thick drops of rain began to fall. The wind howled through the trees, as if 1,000 invisible wolves were answering the storm's call. And you thought I would be the next sacrifice, I said, understanding flooding me like an icy wave. That's why you brought me back. Why you insisted on the ball, the presentation. No! He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. I brought you back because I thought together we could break this cycle. That you who lived among the wolves without losing yourself could show me how to be free. Amelia let out a hysterical laugh. Free? There's no freedom for us. The curse follows us like a shadow. Do you think it was a coincidence he found you in the forest? Do you think it was fate? It was the curse looking for its next sacrifice. The wind was blowing so hard now we could barely stand. The lake, once so serene, churned with violent waves that licked at the shore. I felt something inside me respond to that fury, as if an ancient wild force was awakening from a long slumber. I am not a sacrifice. I said, my voice firm despite the fear. And he is not a monster. Amelia took a step toward me, her face transfigured by hatred. You know nothing. You didn't see what I saw. You didn't hear my sister's screams as her blood fed the waters of this lake. You didn't feel the weight of the silence afterward when we all pretended nothing had happened. Enough, Amelia! His voice was like thunder, overpowering the roar of the storm. But she didn't seem to hear him. She came closer, her eyes fixed on mine, her hand extended as if to touch my face. It's always a lost child, she murmured. A child with no name, no family. A child no one will look for. I felt my body stiffen, unable to move. There was something hypnotic in her gaze, something that held me like a snake holds a mouse before it strikes. But you grew up, she continued, her voice now almost sweet. You became a woman. And he fell in love with you, didn't he? The romantic fool. Thinks love can break the curse, that it can defeat a pact sealed with blood. Amelia, he shouted again, moving to separate us. She spun with the speed of a viper and something glinted in her hand, a small, sharp blade. Before he could react, she struck him in the chest. Not a deep blow, but enough to draw blood, staining his white shirt a vivid red. The blood of the firstborn, she whispered, her eyes wide, almost in a trance. The blood of the wolf, the first part of the sacrifice. He staggered back, more surprised than hurt. He looked at the red stain spreading across the fabric, then at his sister, disbelief etched on his face. What have you done? Amelia smiled, a hollow smile devoid of any emotion. What our father didn't have the courage to do. What you refuse to accept. I'm breaking the cycle, brother. The only way I can. She turned to me again, the blade raised. I saw the intent in her eyes before she even moved. But this time my body responded. Not with fear, but with the strength I had learned in the mountains, with the swiftness needed to survive among predators. I dodged the blow, grabbing her wrist tightly. Surprisingly, she didn't fight back. On the contrary, her body went limp as if in relief. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw beyond the hatred, beyond the madness. I saw only a tired woman broken by a burden she had carried for too long. You don't understand, she murmured. He'll fully transform one day. He'll be lost to the forest like all the others. And then they'll come for me, just like they came for my father. Who? I asked, not loosening my grip on her wrist. The guardians of the pact, the ones who keep the balance, the ones who demand the sacrifice each generation. The storm roared around us, and the lake now looked like a boiling cauldron. On the horizon, lightning split the dark sky. There is no pact, he said, approaching, his hand pressed to the wound on his chest. They're just legends, Amelia. Stories our father told to scare us, to maintain control. Then why do you change? She screamed, tears now streaming freely down her face. Why do your eyes change when the moon is full? Why do you feel the call of the forest? Because I believed the stories, he answered, his voice softer now. Because I was taught from childhood that it was my destiny, my curse. Because fear has power, sister. Fear can turn fantasies into reality. Amelia shook her head, refusing to listen. You're lying. Like he lied. Like they all lied. I'm not lying. He took another step toward us. Look at me, Amelia. I'm your brother. Not a monster, not a wolf. Just a man who grew up believing a lie. The wind suddenly died down, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. The lake's waters began to calm, the waves shrinking to small ripples. I felt Amelia's body tremble under my grip. But I saw her, she whispered, her eyes lost in some distant memory. I saw our sister that night. I saw what they did to her. What did you see? I asked, slightly loosening my grip on her wrist. She closed her eyes as if she couldn't bear the memory. They took her to the lake. My father and the others, hooded men. They were chanting in an ancient tongue. Her voice was a mere thread. She was crying, begging for me, calling my name. I wanted to help her, but I couldn't move. And then one of them raised the knife. And the blood? The blood ran into the water. And something answered from the depths. A heavy silence followed her words. I looked at him, searching for an explanation, a denial, anything that could dispel the horror of that image, but he looked as shocked as I was. Amelia, he said finally, his voice choked. I was just a child when that happened. I didn't know. I didn't remember. Because they didn't want you to know, she replied, opening her eyes again. Not until it was your turn. Not until you had to choose between sacrificing yourself or sacrificing another. I released her wrist, taking a step back. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I had just heard, if what she was saying was true. And now, I asked, looking between them, what happens now? Amelia let the small blade fall to the wet grass. Now the cycle breaks, she murmured. One way or another. He moved to her, ignoring the pain of his wound, and embraced her. It was an unexpected gesture, almost desperate, as if trying to reclaim years of distance and resentment in a single moment. Neither of us will be sacrificed, he said, his voice firm. And neither of us will sacrifice anyone. If there is a pact, it ends today. Amelia sobbed against her brother's chest, her body shaking with violent spasms. She seemed like a frightened child, no longer the cold, calculating woman I had known. They will come, she murmured between sobs. They always come. Then we'll be ready, he replied, looking at me over his sister's head. All of us. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. The sky cleared, and a pale winter sun emerged from between the scattering clouds. On the lake, the water returned to its usual serenity, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. It seemed impossible that moments before everything had been plunged into chaos and fury. We returned to the house in silence, each lost in thought. Martha was waiting for us at the back door, her face pale with worry. Her eyes widened when she saw his wound, Amelia's blood-stained clothes. Prepare hot water and bandages, he ordered, without stopping. And gather everyone in the main hall in 1 hour. Martha nodded quickly and disappeared inside. He turned to me, his gaze intense. You don't have to stay, he said softly. You can leave now if you want. Go back to the forest, to your freedom. I looked past him, to the distant hills where the wolves ran free, where I had learned to survive, to be part of nature without questioning my place in it. For a moment, I felt the call of that simple, direct world, without the complications and dark secrets of humans. But then, I looked at him again, at his eyes that carried the weight of generations, at his hands that held Amelia so gently despite everything. And I knew I couldn't abandon them now. I'll stay, I replied simply. At least until we understand what's really happening. He nodded, relief visible on his tired face. Thank you. An hour later, the main hall was full. Servants, guards, gardeners, cooks, all the inhabitants of the house had been summoned. Anxious murmurs filled the room. Curious glances followed our movements. He stood before the great fireplace, the wound on his chest carefully cleaned and bandaged. Amelia sat in a nearby chair, her eyes red, her hands folded in her lap. I remained a little apart, observing. Thank you for coming, he began, and the murmuring ceased instantly. I know many of you have served this house for generations, that you know its stories, its traditions, its secrets. A tense silence followed his words. I saw faces turn pale, others harden. Some looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Today, I want to talk about one of those secrets, about a tradition that has been perpetuated for too long, fueled by fear and ignorance. Martha, standing near the door, made a small gesture with her hand, as if to warn him not to continue. He noticed her but went on anyway. There are rumors about my family, about an ancient pact sealed with blood, about sacrifices and transformations. His voice was clear, firm. Some of you probably grew up hearing these stories. Perhaps you even witnessed events that seemed to confirm them. The silence was now absolute, oppressive. I felt the air grow thick, as if the house itself were holding its breath. My sister, he continued, gesturing toward Amelia, witnessed something terrible when she was a child. Something that marked her deeply. Something that involved the death of our younger sister. A collective gasp went through the room. Some of the older women made the sign of the cross. I'm not here to deny what happened, nor to hide the truth, whatever it may be. I am here to declare that, as of today, any tradition involving sacrifice, any pact that demands blood, any belief that justifies the death of innocents is officially abolished in this house. By my order and authority as head of this family. A growing murmur ran through the room. I saw faces of relief, others of concern, some of outright fear. "But, sir." An elderly man, whom I recognized as the head butler, stepped forward. "The consequences. The pact." "If there are consequences, I will face them," he replied, cutting the old man off. "If a pact truly exists, let them come to collect from me, not from innocent children." The butler retreated, his face pale. "There is one more thing," he continued, looking directly at me now. "Many of you have speculated about this woman's presence in our home. About her origin, her history, about what she represents." I felt all eyes turn to me. I kept my posture straight, my chin up, as I had learned to do before predators in the forest. "She is not a sacrifice," he declared, his voice softer now, "nor a curiosity to be studied. She is—" He hesitated, searching for the words. "She is a reminder of what we can be when free from the shackles of fear, of what exists beyond these walls and traditions. And she has as much right to be here as any of us." Amelia stood then, unsteadily. Her face still showed traces of the recent shock, but there was a new determination in her eyes. "My brother is right," she said, her voice weak but clear. "For too long we have bowed to superstitions and fears. For too long we have accepted the unacceptable in the name of tradition." She looked around, meeting the eyes of each person in the room. "I myself perpetuated this madness. I carried the weight of guilt and silence for years, but it ends today." I moved toward them, feeling it was time for me to take a stand as well. "I don't know what this pact you speak of is," I said, surprised at the firmness of my own voice. "But I know the forest better than most of you. I know its rhythms, its laws, and I can tell you that nature does not demand human sacrifices. It demands respect, harmony, not blood." The silence that followed was different from before, less tense, more thoughtful. I saw in the expressions around me that something was changing slowly, a seed of doubt planted in fertile ground. And sometimes, that's all it takes to start a transformation. "From this day forward," he declared, concluding, "this house will be governed by new laws. Laws of compassion and respect, not of fear. Anyone who wishes to remain under these conditions is welcome. Anyone who cannot accept this change is free to leave." No one moved. No one spoke, just nods, exchanged glances, sighs of relief or resignation. "You are dismissed," he finished. As the room emptied, the three of us remained in silence, a strange trinity bound by secrets and blood. Amelia was the first to speak. "What will we do if they come?" she asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "The guardians? We will face them," he answered simply. "Together?" She nodded, too tired to argue. She left the room with slow steps, her shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. It was just the two of us, the crackling of the fire in the hearth, the only sound breaking the silence. "Do you really believe there's no pact?" I finally asked. "That it's all just stories?" He walked to the window, looking out at the distant hills where the sun was beginning to set. "I don't know," he admitted. "There are things I can't explain, moments when I feel something different inside me, something not entirely human." "Like when I saw you in the valley?" He nodded without turning. "Yes, like in those days." He sighed. "But I also know that fear and belief have power, that we can become what we fear if we convince ourselves of it for long enough." I came to stand beside him at the window. Outside, the first stars were beginning to dot the darkening sky. "And now?" I asked. "What do we do while we wait to find out the truth?" He turned to me, and in his eyes was a lightness I had never seen before. "We live," he answered simply, "without fear, without guilt, the way we should have been living all along." I reached out, lightly touching the bandage on his chest. "And if the fear returns?" He covered my hand with his. "Then I'll remember how you survived alone in the mountains, without bowing to terror or despair. How you found beauty and meaning in even the darkest places." The wind blew softly outside, carrying the scent of the forest and, distant, almost imperceptible, the echo of a lone howl. I felt a tremor run down my spine, not of fear but of recognition, of belonging. "They'll always be there," I murmured. "Waiting, yes," he agreed. "But now we can choose whether we answer the call. And how." We stood there side by side, watching the night fall over the hills. Two beings torn between worlds, between natures, between histories. But for the first time, I didn't feel lost in that division. I felt whole, as if the different parts of me had finally found a point of balance. Winter passed slowly, covering the hills with its white blanket. The house changed in those months. Voices grew louder, laughter more frequent. The shadows that seemed to inhabit every corner retreated, giving way to a new light. Amelia recovered slowly, like a plant that finally finds the sun after long years in darkness. Sometimes I would find her in the garden, even on the coldest days, her face lifted to the sky, eyes closed, breathing deeply as if trying to drink in the world. He and I developed a curious routine. In the mornings, I would teach him about the forest, about the rhythms of nature, how to read the wind and the clouds. In the afternoons, he would show me books, maps, stories of distant places I had never imagined. At night, we walked the hills together, watching the stars, listening to the wolves in the distance, feeling the strange connection that bound us beyond words. It was on one of those nights, as spring was announcing its arrival with the first buds breaking through the snow, that he asked me, "Did you never want to know where you came from? Who you were before the forest?" We were sitting on a large, flat rock atop a hill from which we could see the entire estate and, beyond it, the vast expanse of the forest. At first, yes, I replied, watching the crescent moon bathe the landscape in its silver light. I cried every night, calling for someone I couldn't remember. But then, I hesitated, searching for the words. Then the forest became my past and my present. There was no before anymore. He nodded in understanding. And you were never curious? After you came back? I thought for a moment, feeling the cold wind on my face. I was. But I was also afraid. I turned to face him. Afraid of discovering I was abandoned on purpose, that I wasn't wanted. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. A gesture that had become frequent between us, though we had never spoken of what it meant. "I have a theory," he said, his voice low, "about who you might be." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "What theory?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "The night my father disappeared, someone else went missing. A woman from the nearby village. They said she was expecting a child, an illegitimate one." He paused, looking at our joined hands. There were rumors about who the father might be. My heart sped up as I understood what he was suggesting. "Your father," he nodded slowly. "It's possible. The dates match, and it would explain a lot of things. Why he disappeared that night, why you found me in the forest, and why you answer the call of nature like I do," he finished, raising his gaze to mine. "Why your eyes sometimes seem to reflect the moon in a way no ordinary human eyes would." Silence. Only the wind in the pines and in the distance the occasional hoot of an owl. "If it's true," I began, my voice failing. "If it's true, we're siblings." "Half-siblings," he completed, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Seems like the kind of cruel irony fate would appreciate, doesn't it?" I felt a sharp pang in my chest, a pain I couldn't name. "It's just a theory," I murmured, pulling my hand from his. "We have no way of knowing." "No," he agreed. "We don't." More silence. The wind picked up, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and new growth. Below us, the lights of the house twinkled like earthbound stars. What would it change? I finally asked. If we really were siblings? He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the full complexity of our situation. Everything. And nothing. That night we returned to the house in silence, each lost in thought. A subtle distance settled between us in the days that followed. Not a rift, not an intentional separation, but a necessary space to process the possibility that had been raised. I retreated to my rooms for long hours, watching the forest from the window, trying to reconcile the conflicting feelings that assailed me. He delved into the family's old books, searching for any mention of the woman who might have been my mother. It was Amelia who broke our mutual silence. One afternoon when she found me alone in the library. "He told you, didn't he?" she asked, sitting in the armchair across from me. "His theory about your origin." I nodded, not trusting my voice to answer. "I was only 12 when it all happened," she continued, her gaze lost in distant memories. "But I remember the woman. She would come to the house sometimes with excuses about delivering herbs or wild berries. She was beautiful in a wild sort of way. Dark hair like yours, Light eyes that seem to see right through people. Do you think it's true then? She sighed, adjusting the pleats of her dark blue dress. I think it's possible. My father was a man of appetites, and she seemed to hold the same kind of fascination for him that you hold for my brother. She looked directly at me, though for different reasons, I hope. I felt my face grow warm and I looked away. We don't. It's not like that, she smiled, a tired but genuine smile. You don't have to lie to me, child. I have eyes. I see how you look at each other. She paused. And I see how you've been avoiding each other since that night on the hill. I stood up, restless, and walked to the window. Outside, spring was advancing, painting the world in new shades of green and pink. If it's true, if we're siblings. I couldn't finish the sentence. Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. Amelia rose as well, coming closer. But blood isn't the only bond that matters. You found each other in the forest for a reason, whatever it may be. There's a link between you that transcends flesh and name. A wolf's bond, I murmured, remembering how the pack recognized its members even after long separations. Yes. She touched my arm lightly. And maybe that's the real pact. Not one made with blood and sacrifice, but with recognition and acceptance. I turned to her, surprised by the depth of her perception. You've changed, she laughed, a light sound I had never heard from her before. We've all changed. The house, the forest, us. Winter is retreating, and with it, the ghosts that haunted us. She paused, her face growing more serious. But some might return. There's always the risk. The guardians of the pact, I whispered, remembering her panic at the lake. If they exist. They haven't shown themselves yet, she replied, looking out the window. Perhaps they're just waiting, watching. A shiver ran down my spine, and for an instant, I had the feeling of being watched. I spun around quickly, looking toward the library door, half expecting to see someone standing there, but it was empty. Or maybe, Amelia continued, not noticing my unease, maybe they never existed beyond the fear in the eyes of a child who witnessed something too terrible to understand. That night, when everyone else had retired, I found him again in the main hall before the fireplace. It wasn't planned. We hadn't arranged to meet there. It was just fate, or perhaps that strange connection that bound us, that brought us to the same place at the same time. He was sitting in one of the large leather armchairs, an old book open on his lap. He looked up as I entered, and a tired smile formed on his lips. Can't sleep either, he asked, closing the book. The wind is restless tonight, I replied, approaching. And so are my thoughts. He gestured to the armchair next to his. Sit, we can be restless together. I accepted the invitation, feeling the warmth of the fire on my face. For a moment we sat in silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth. I found something, he said finally. In my father's journals. I turned to him, my heart quickening. About the woman. About you. He opened the book again, flipping through until he found the page he was looking for. It's in code, but I managed to decipher part of it. He wrote about a terrible mistake he made, about a child who should never have been born. His voice faltered slightly. About how he feared you would inherit the blood of the wolves. I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I'd been punched in the gut. So it's true. It wasn't a question. He closed the book again, looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It seemed so. Though we can't be absolutely certain. I stood up, unable to remain seated. I walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the moon shone brightly, illuminating the garden with its silver light. What does that make me? I asked, more to myself than to him. Illegitimate daughter abandoned, raised by wolves. Neither human nor animal, from here nor anywhere. I felt his presence behind me before he spoke. He didn't come too close, respecting the space I seemed to need. It makes you unique, he answered, his voice soft. It makes you someone who belongs to two worlds, who understands two natures. That's not a curse, it's a gift. I turned to face him, the tears I wouldn't let fall, blurring my vision. A gift that separates us. He took a step forward, closing some of the distance between us, only if we let it. We're siblings, I said, the word almost breaking in my throat. Perhaps. He reached out, touching my face gently. But we are also two beings who recognized each other across time and distance, who found each other when it seemed impossible, who share a connection that transcends names and human definitions. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand against my skin. "And what do we do now?" I whispered. "What we've always done," he answered, moving closer. "We follow our instincts, we listen to the call. We find our own way, even if no one else understands it." When I opened my eyes again, his face was close to mine. We didn't touch beyond that hand on my face, but there was an intimacy in that moment that went beyond the physical. "And if the Guardians come?" I asked, remembering Amelia's warning. "If the pact exists and demands its price?" A slow smile formed on his lips. "Then we will face them, together, as the pack that we are." The next morning I was woken by an unusual commotion in the house. Raised voices, hurried footsteps in the halls, the metallic sound of weapons being prepared. I dressed quickly and ran downstairs, my heart pounding with a premonition I couldn't define. I found him in the main foyer, surrounded by armed men. His face was serious, focused as he gave rapid instructions. Amelia stood beside him, pale but composed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What happened?" I asked, approaching. He turned to me, and I saw the worry in his eyes before he spoke. They were spotted on the northern hills, hooded men carrying torches, approaching the property. I felt the blood in my veins run cold. "The Guardians," he nodded grimly, "or whoever they are. They're coming our way." "How many?" "A dozen, maybe more." He turned back to the men. "I want all guards in position. Do not fire unless you are fired upon. I want to know who they are and what they want." The men nodded and left quickly, leaving the three of us in the foyer. "The time has come," Amelia said, her voice surprisingly calm. "They've come to collect on the pact." "Or they've come for another reason," he replied, picking up a rifle from the table. "Either way, we'll be prepared." I stepped forward, making the decision before I was even conscious of it. "Let me go with you." He looked at me, surprise clear on his face. "It's dangerous." "I know the hills better than anyone," I answered, holding his gaze. "I know how to move without being seen, how to read the wind and the signs. I can help." He hesitated, glancing at Amelia as if seeking her opinion. She nodded slowly. "She's right. She knows the terrain. And," she paused meaningfully, "if what we fear is true, she's involved in this too." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Very well, but stay close. No unnecessary risks." We left minutes later, a small group consisting of him, me, and 4 of the most experienced men on the estate. Amelia stayed behind to coordinate the defense of the house in case the strangers managed to get past us. The day was clear, the sky a deep blue that contrasted with the tension we felt. Spring was advancing, covering the hills with wildflowers and new grass. We climbed the north slope in silence, each lost in thought. I walked slightly ahead, following tracks the others didn't even notice. A turned leaf, pressed moss, the faint scent of humans on the air. The wind was in our favor, carrying sounds and smells of the intruders before they could sense us. It was in a small clearing among the pines that we saw them for the first time. There were 10, maybe 12 as had been reported. Tall men dressed in long, dark cloaks, their faces partially hidden by hoods. They moved with an almost military precision in formation, carrying torches even in the daylight. There was something unsettling about their synchronicity, their absolute silence as they advanced. We crouched behind a rock formation, watching them. "Who are they?" one of the men whispered. "Never seen anything like it." "They look like they're following some kind of ritual," another answered, his voice tense. "Look how they move. Like they're in a trance." He watched with intensity, his face impassive, but I noticed the tension in his jaw, his shoulders. "Can you hear what they're saying?" he asked me, knowing my senses were sharper than theirs. I focused, tuning out the rustling leaves, the distant birdsong, the frantic beating of the hearts around me. And then I caught it, faint but distinct, a low, rhythmic chant in a language I didn't recognize. "They're chanting," I whispered. "Ancient words. I don't understand them, but the sound—" I hesitated, a shiver running down my spine. "The sound is like the wind in the mountain caves. Hollow, cold." He nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the strangers. "They're heading for the lake," he observed, his face paling slightly. "The same place where my father disappeared," I finished, my voice tense. "Where the sacrifices happened." The men exchanged nervous glances. The legend was known to all, but few truly believed it, until now. "What do we do, sir?" asked the oldest of the guards. He took a deep breath as if making a difficult decision. "We'll follow them. Find out what they're planning." He turned to me. "Can you lead us on a more discreet path? Something that will let us get to the lake before them, or at least without being seen." I nodded, already mapping the route in my mind. "There's a deer trail that skirts the hill. It's narrow and difficult, but it will take us directly to the eastern shore of the lake. We can watch them from there, hidden by the brush." "Perfect." He turned to the guards. "Follow us and maintain absolute silence. Don't act unless I give the order." We set off immediately, with me in the lead, guiding them along the path I'd described. It was truly difficult, steep in some places, almost non-existent in others, but I knew every rock, every route, every turn. I moved as I had learned from the wolves, light and silent, alert to every sign of danger. The men followed with more difficulty but kept pace, driven by the urgency of the situation. We reached the eastern shore of the lake a few minutes before the hooded figures. The sun was already beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting golden reflections on the water's surface. We hid among the dense bushes lining the lake, our hearts racing from the run and the anticipation of what was to come. We didn't have to wait long. Soon the strangers emerged from the forest on the opposite shore, still in formation, still chanting that disturbing melody. We could see them better now. They were men of various ages, some older, others surprisingly young. Their faces, partially visible under their hoods, wore expressions of almost fanatical concentration. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, carried something in his hands, a long object wrapped in dark cloth. "What is that?" one of the guards whispered. "Quiet," he ordered, his voice tense. The hooded men stopped at the water's edge, forming a perfect semicircle. The leader stepped forward until the water touched the tips of his boots. He raised the object he carried above his head and the cloth slipped away, revealing what looked like an ancient blade, long and curved, with inscriptions along its length that glinted strangely in the setting sun. "Blood calls to blood," the leader declared, in clear, formal English. "The pact demands its price. The blood moon approaches, and with it the time of renewal. Where is the son of the wolf? Where is the child who must be sacrificed?" A heavy silence fell over the lake. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if nature itself were holding its breath before this profane ritual. I felt more than saw the movement beside me. He was standing up, leaving the cover of the bushes, exposing himself to the stranger's view. "I am here," he said, his voice firm and clear, echoing across the lake. "I am the son of the wolf, the firstborn of the line. I have come to answer the call." The hooded men spun as one, turning toward him. I saw surprise, and then a kind of dark satisfaction on their partially visible faces. "Warren Wolf," the leader declared, lowering the blade. "Son of Henry Wolf, grandson of Gabriel Wolf, the unbroken line that sealed the ancestral pact." He took a few steps forward, maintaining a safe distance but projecting his voice with authority. "Who are you?" he asked. "And what is this pact you speak of?" The leader laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "We are the guardians of the balance. We who preserve the ancient tradition. We who maintain the veil between worlds." He raised the blade, which reflected a sunbeam directly into our eyes. "And as for the pact, you know very well what we speak of. The gift of transformation. The power to walk between two natures. The price your family has paid for generations." "A price in blood," he said, taking another step forward. "The blood of innocent children," the leader nodded gravely. "The purest blood, the most meaningful sacrifice. The offering that maintains the balance." "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "If I declare this pact null and void," the hooded men stirred, exchanging glances. The leader maintained his composure, though a slight tremor in his hand betrayed his surprise. "No one refuses the pact, son of the wolf. No one escapes their heritage." He made a sweeping gesture with the blade. "Your very nature betrays you. The call of the moon, the hunger for the forest, the blood that boils beneath your skin on certain nights. You can deny it with words, but your body knows the truth. He didn't answer immediately. I saw his tense shoulders, his hands clenched into fists, the internal battle he was waging. It's true that I feel the call, he finally admitted. It's true that there are nights when my eyes see in the dark and my ears pick up sounds no ordinary human should hear. He paused, taking a deep breath. But that doesn't make me a monster. It doesn't obligate me to perpetuate a cycle of violence and death. The leader took a step forward, his eyes glinting under his hood. You speak as your father spoke, before he disappeared, before he was persuaded. I felt a chill run down my spine at the implication of those words. He noticed it too, for his posture stiffened even more. What did you do to my father? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. The leader smiled, a cold, calculating smile. We showed him the true nature of the pact, the power he rejected, the complete transformation. He opened his arms in a dramatic gesture. He runs free now, son of the wolf, freer than he ever was as a man, more powerful than he ever dreamed of being. You lie, his voice trembled slightly. My father is dead. Dead to the world of men, perhaps. The leader slowly lowered his arms. But very much alive on the other side of the veil, and waiting for you, if you have the courage to follow in his footsteps. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up too, ignoring the urgent whispers of the guards to stay hidden. I stepped out from the bushes, stopping beside him. He's not alone, I declared, my voice steadier than I felt. And he will not yield to your threats or your lies. The leader's eyes widened visibly when he saw me. A murmur went through the hooded men, an unusual stir that momentarily broke the disturbing synchronicity they had maintained until then. The daughter of the wolf, the leader murmured, and there was genuine astonishment in his voice. The lost child, the one who should have been the sacrifice. I felt the blood freeze in my veins at those words. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. The leader recovered, resuming his authoritative stance. You are the daughter of Henry Wolf and the woman of the forest. The child he hid, the one who should have sealed the pact in your generation. He pointed the blade at me. But fate has curious ways of correcting its course. You have returned, and now the cycle can be completed. He took a step forward, placing himself partially in front of me, shielding me. Do not come near her, he said. And there was a growl in his voice that didn't sound entirely human. Do not dare touch her. The leader smiled as if that reaction confirmed something he already knew. You see, the wolf's blood runs strong in your veins, even as you try to deny it. The beast awakens when they threaten what is yours. He lowered the blade in an almost conciliatory gesture. We did not come to fight, son of the wolf. We came to offer a choice, a new path for the ancestral pact. What path? He asked, still tense, still protective. A different sacrifice. Not of innocent blood, but of free will. The leader looked from one of us to the other. The blood moon approaches. On the night of its peak, if one of you chooses to cross the veil, to fully embrace the nature of the wolf, the pact will be renewed in a new way. A fairer way, more balanced. Silence. Only the gentle lapping of water against the lake's shore and, in the distance, the occasional cry of a bird. And if we refuse? I finally asked. The leader sighed, and there was something almost regretful in his gesture. Then the veil between worlds will tear. The barrier that keeps the ancient creatures confined to the forest will fall, and the chaos that will follow. He left the sentence unfinished, the meaning too clear to need articulation. How can we trust you? He asked, his voice a little less tense. How do we know this isn't just another manipulation? You can't, the leader answered simply, just as you can't trust your own instincts, your own senses. Doubt is the price of consciousness, son of the wolf. Certainty belongs only to animals and madmen. With that, the leader gestured to the others, who began to retreat slowly, maintaining their formation. Before turning to follow them, he addressed us one last time. You have until the next full moon to decide. When the sky turns red, we will be here again, awaiting your choice. He looked directly at me, or your lack of one. And then they were gone, disappearing among the trees with the same unsettling synchronicity with which they had appeared. We stood there for a long moment, absorbing what had just happened. The guards hesitantly emerged from their hiding place, approaching us with expressions that mixed confusion and fear. "Sir?" one of them said, his voice uncertain. "What do we do now?" He turned slowly, and there was a new determination in his eyes. "Now we go home." "And we prepare." "For what exactly?" another guard asked. He looked at me, and for an instant, I saw in him something of the wolf I had first met in the valley so many years ago. "To find the truth," he answered simply. "Behind the legends, behind the fear." As we returned to the estate, the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky a blood red. An omen, perhaps, or just the end of another day, the eternal cycle that neither pacts nor legends could break. Fate had placed us at a crossroads. We were siblings by blood, bound by ties that transcended name. We were creatures torn between two worlds, between two natures. And now we had a choice to make. A choice that could change not only our future, but the balance between realities we barely understood. A red moon would rise soon, and with it the answer that only our hearts, both human and wild, could give.